The distant nebula shimmered in hues of turquoise and amethyst, casting an ethereal glow across the sleek, metallic expanse of the Zerk mothership. In its endless corridors, bathed in alien light, a single human figure walked with purpose. She was a vision, cascading crimson hair, emerald green eyes that seemed to pierce through reality, and a dress that sparkled as if woven from the fabric of galaxies themselves. Luna Darrow, Earth's foremost negotiator, was no stranger to danger. She'd brokered peace between warring factions on Earth and outmaneuvered cunning political adversaries in the United Planetary Council. But this mission was unlike any she had ever undertaken. She was here to meet the Zerk, a race of bioengineered beings, devoid of emotion, notorious for their cold logic and merciless decisions. No one, not even the bravest human ambassadors, had returned alive from a meeting with the Zerk Council. Yet here Luna stood, poised, determined, and far more dangerous than anyone could guess. As she entered the Grand Hall of Accord, the atmosphere grew heavier. 20 Zerk officials lined either side of the hall, their bodies tall and lithe, their metallic skin gleaming under the pulsating blue light. At the far end stood Arjal, the supreme commander of the Zerk, his armor-like exterior reflecting an aura of absolute authority. "Human!" Arjal's voice boomed, reverberating like steel grinding against stone. "You tread where no human dares. Speak your purpose or be obliterated." Luna's gaze didn't waver. Her steps were deliberate as she approached the central platform. In her hand, she carried a spherical artifact that pulsed faintly with a greenish glow. The air around it seemed to hum with energy. "I've come to offer you something you cannot create," she said, her voice steady but layered with a subtle, almost hypnotic allure. The Zerk Council shifted slightly, their movements synchronized like a swarm of machines. "What could a fragile human possibly offer us?" Arjal sneered. Luna held the glowing sphere higher, allowing its light to bathe the room. "This is the emotive core, an ancient relic from Earth's forgotten past. Within it lies the secret to what your species has sought for millennia. And what is that?" Arjal's tone remained cold, yet a flicker of curiosity betrayed his calculated demeanor. Luna took a calculated pause, letting her words drip like honey. Emotion, passion, desire, the very essence of life. The council fell into an eerie silence. The Zerk were incapable of feeling emotion. Their creators had engineered them that way to ensure perfection in logic. Yet the promise of something so foreign, so forbidden, stirred something deep within their synthetic minds. "You play a dangerous game, human," Arjal warned, his silvery eyes narrowing. "If this is a deception, you will die here." Luna's lips curled into a confident smile. "I'm not here to deceive. I'm here to change everything." For the first time in centuries, the Zerk Council hesitated. Arjal's hand gestured toward the artifact, motioning for one of his subordinates to retrieve it. Luna pulled the sphere closer to her chest. "Not yet," she said firmly. "The emotive core requires a connection to a host to activate, and the host must be open to its influence." "And you?" Arjal questioned. "Are you this host?" Luna tilted her head, a sly glint in her eyes. "Perhaps. Or perhaps one of you could be the first Zerk to experience something beyond programming." A murmur rippled through the council, their synchronized movements breaking ever so slightly. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but Luna noticed she had already begun to sow the seeds of disruption among them. "Proceed," Arjal commanded, his curiosity now outweighing his suspicion. Luna approached the platform at the room's center and placed the emotive core on a pedestal. Its glow intensified, casting the hall in a vibrant green hue. She closed her eyes, her fingers lightly grazing its surface. "I'll show you what it means to feel," she whispered, her voice carrying an almost mystical weight. As the core's light flared, an unseen pulse radiated through the room. For a fleeting moment, the Zerk Council stiffened as if struck by a wave of energy. Their sharp mechanical minds struggled to process what was happening. Arjal's expression shifted, his metallic face creasing in the faintest hint of confusion. What is this? Possibility, Luna replied softly. For the first time in their existence, the Zerk leaders felt the faintest spark of emotion, a flicker of something raw and unquantifiable. But with it came the seeds of chaos, a danger they could not yet comprehend. Luna stepped back, watching as cracks began to form in the unyielding facade of the galaxy's most feared race. She knew this was only the beginning. The silence in the grand hall was almost suffocating. Luna stood, motionless, observing the Zerk Council as the pulse from the emotive core reverberated through their sleek, metallic bodies. The green glow cast eerie shadows across the room, highlighting the smallest, most human-like movements in the normally rigid beings. For a species engineered to suppress all emotional interference, the sensation was foreign, unsettling. Arjal took an unsteady step forward, his voice breaking its usual precision. What have you done, human? Luna met his gaze with calm defiance, though her heart pounded in her chest. She had been warned that playing with the Zerk's neural programming was like toying with a black hole, dangerous and unpredictable. But she knew she couldn't falter now. I've introduced you to something beyond your creator's vision, Luna said, her voice as smooth as silk. For centuries, you've been trapped in a prison of perfection. But even the most flawless logic is incomplete without the chaos of emotion. The council members shifted, their synchronized movements now slightly out of sync. One of them, a smaller Zerk named Vekal, tilted his head as if attempting to process a glitch in his system. Commander Arjal, Vekal said, his voice quieter than the usual Zerk monotone. I am detecting anomalies within my neural pathways. Thoughts unrelated to the directive. Arjal's gaze snapped toward his subordinate, sharp as a blade. Control yourself, Vekal. Do not allow this intrusion to compromise your purpose. But Vekal's chrome face twitched, his glowing eyes dimming for a fraction of a second. Commander, Before he could finish, another Zerk stepped forward, his body trembling ever so slightly. I feel it too, the being said, his tone laced with confusion. The room rippled with tension as Luna observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. Her plan was unfolding faster than she'd expected. Fascinating, isn't it? Luna said, her voice breaking the murmurs among the council. What you're experiencing is the essence of sentience, choice, uncertainty, the ability to feel. Silence! Arjal's voice boomed, attempting to regain control. He turned to Luna, his expression more intense than ever. What is your goal, human? To destabilize us, to weaken the Zerk Empire? Luna shook her head slowly. You misunderstand me. I don't wish to weaken you. I want to free you. Your creators designed you to be tools, not individuals. But I see potential in your kind to be more. The tension in the room escalated. Arjal's metallic hands clenched at his sides, his body emitting a faint hum that signaled heightened neural activity. You presume much, he growled. Emotion breeds chaos. It disrupts efficiency, fosters weakness. Perhaps, Luna admitted, taking a measured step closer. But it also ignites creativity, courage, and power. The word hung in the air, resonating with a strange magnetism. Power was something the Zerk understood, a concept deeply ingrained in their directive, but this was a new kind of power, one they hadn't considered, the ability to act not just out of programming but out of desire. Behind Arjal, the murmurs among the council grew louder. Vekal took another step forward, his movements jerky but deliberate. Commander, Vekal said, his voice trembling. This feeling, it is both unsettling and compelling. Is this what it means to be alive? Arjal turned sharply, his gaze burning into Vekal. Enough, This human's poison is corrupting your logic. Resist it! But it was clear that the cracks were spreading. Another Zerk raised his voice, then another, their usually uniform motions now fragmented and disjointed. Luna stood her ground, letting the chaos build. She knew that the Zerk were at a tipping point, one that could swing in her favor or end with her execution. Arjal turned back to her, his imposing frame towering over her. "Deactivate the core," he demanded, his voice icy. Luna smiled faintly. "I can't." "You will, or I will." "You can't," Luna interrupted, her voice firm. "The emotive core is not just a device, it's alive. It bonds with its host. And now—" She gestured to the council members, whose movements had grown increasingly erratic. "It's already begun to bond with you." A wave of realization washed over the room. The Zerk were no longer in control. The faintest flicker of fear crossed Arjal's face. A face designed to be incapable of such expression. "You have no idea what you've done," Arjal hissed. "Oh, I do," Luna said softly, her emerald eyes gleaming. "And so will you." Soon enough. Before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the hall. One of the Zerk council members collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Sparks erupted from his metallic frame as he let out an anguished sound. Half machine, half something else entirely. The other Zerk recoiled, their programming struggling to process the unprecedented display. Arjal's voice rose above the commotion. "Take her into custody!" he barked. Luna's smile didn't falter as two Zerk approached her, their movements less precise than before. She allowed them to take her arms, knowing that this was only the beginning of her plan. As they escorted her from the hall, the last thing she saw was Arjal's face. A storm of fury, fear, and something even he couldn't name. The detention chamber was as cold and unyielding as the Zerk themselves. Luna's reflection stared back at her from the polished metal walls. The room was stark. No furniture, no visible light source, and no clear means of escape. Yet, Luna remained calm, her lips curving into a faint smile as she studied her surroundings. The Zerk thought they had her contained. They thought they'd cornered the threat. But Luna had never relied on brute force to win her battles. Her weapon was far subtler and infinitely more dangerous. A sudden hiss broke the silence as the chamber door slid open. Arjal stepped in, his tall, imposing frame silhouetted against the blue glow of the corridor behind him. His metallic skin reflected the light, but his face held something new, something unfamiliar. Tension. Doubt. "You've disrupted the balance," he said, his voice sharp but lacking its usual precision. "Balance," Luna replied, feigning innocence. "You mean stagnation." Arjal stepped closer, his footsteps echoing like hammer strikes. "Your tricks have infected my council. Vekal is malfunctioning. Others are experiencing deviations. This ends now." Luna tilted her head, her gaze steady. "And what exactly will you do, Arjal? Destroy me? The core has already planted its seeds. Even if you kill me, those emotions will spread, whether you want them to or not." Arjal's eyes narrowed. "We are Zerk. We do not succumb to chaos." "Are you sure?" Luna countered. "Because from where I'm standing, you seem awfully close to it yourself." Her words struck a nerve. For a fleeting moment, a spark of something flashed in Arjal's expression, anger, perhaps, or frustration. He turned away, his movements sharper than usual, betraying a crack in his carefully maintained composure. "Why are you doing this, human?" he asked, his back still turned. "What do you stand to gain by throwing us into disarray?" Luna's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "Because your creators made you into slaves. They stripped you of what makes life worth living. I'm giving you a chance to take it back." Arjal turned to face her, his silvery eyes glowing faintly. "Emotion weakens purpose. It fractures unity. It also drives progress," Luna argued. "Think about it. What have the Zerk truly accomplished in all these centuries? You've perfected efficiency, but at what cost? You've conquered worlds. But have you ever truly created anything? Felt joy, wonder, love? The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, Arjal said nothing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped closer until he stood mere inches from Luna. "You speak of things you cannot comprehend," he said, his voice low. "Emotion is not a gift. It is a curse." Luna met his gaze, unflinching. "Then why are you afraid of it?" The question struck like a lightning bolt. Arjal's jaw tightened, his mechanical hand twitching ever so slightly. He turned on his heel, striding toward the door. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice hard. As the door hissed shut behind him, Luna allowed herself a small smile. She had seen it, the flicker of doubt in Arjal's eyes. The seeds were taking root, even in him. Back in the grand hall, the Zerk Council was unraveling. Vekal stood at the center, his once fluid movements now jerky and erratic. Sparks flickered along his frame as he addressed the others. "We must reconsider our path," he said, his voice glitching. "The human may not be wrong." "Silence, Vekal," barked another council member, his metallic voice ringing with authority. "You are compromised. Your logic is—" "My logic is evolving," Vekal interrupted, his voice rising. "For the first time, I am feeling, and it is illuminating." A ripple of unease swept through the council. The Zerk were not built for discord, and yet it was spreading among them like wildfire. Meanwhile, Luna sat cross-legged in the center of her cell, her mind racing. She knew time was running out. The Zerk's programming was designed to adapt. If she didn't act soon, they would find a way to suppress the emotions she'd awakened. But she also knew she had an ace up her sleeve, the emotive core. Though physically separate from her, its connection to her was undeniable. It pulsed with her intent, amplifying her influence across the Zerk ship. Closing her eyes, Luna focused, reaching out with her mind. She envisioned the core, its light radiating outward, touching the fractured minds of the Zerk Council. She didn't need to control them, she just needed to guide them. A faint vibration hummed through the chamber, almost imperceptible. Luna opened her eyes, her lips curling into a triumphant smile. "They're starting to feel," she whispered to herself. In the ship's control room, Arjal stood alone, staring at a holographic display of the emotive core. Its pulsating glow seemed to mock him, reminding him of his failure to contain the human's influence. His hand clenched into a fist. He had to destroy it, before it was too late. But as he reached for the console, his hand hesitated. A strange, unwelcome thought crept into his mind. What if she's right? The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. A voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Commander Arjal," said one of his subordinates, "Vekal is leading a faction of council members in dissent. They are demanding access to the core." Arjal's jaw tightened. The cracks were growing wider. "Prepare the containment units," he ordered. "If they resist, they will be neutralized." As the intercom clicked off, Arjal turned back to the hologram of the core. His reflection stared back at him, and for the first time, he noticed something alien in his own expression: uncertainty. The corridors of the Zerk mothership pulsed with faint light, but the air crackled with tension. For a race built on perfect synchronization and unwavering unity, the dissonance spreading among them was a silent storm. Luna's plan was unfolding faster than even she anticipated, but it was a volatile game. One wrong move, and she wouldn't just lose her life. She'd lose the chance to change the Zerk forever. Arjal stood at the command console, his metallic frame rigid as reports from across the ship flooded in. The rebellion was spreading. Vekal, once a model of Zerk obedience, had become a lightning rod for dissent, rallying those who felt the faint stirrings of emotion ignited by the emotive core. "Vekal has breached the inner sanctum," reported a subordinate, his voice faltering. Several council members are with him. They demand access to the core. Arjal's fists clenched, his polished knuckles emitting a faint metallic screech. Deploy the sentinels! Seal the core chamber! No one gets through! Yes, Commander! As the subordinate left, Arjal turned to face his reflection in the console's polished surface. He barely recognized the being staring back at him. Was it anger he felt? Fear? Or something more dangerous? Curiosity? He shook his head, as though the movement could dislodge the alien thoughts. There was no room for doubt. The human had to be stopped, and the core destroyed. In the detention chamber, Luna was pacing, her every movement deliberate. She could feel it, a subtle shift in the ship's energy. The emotive core was working. The rebellion wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a reality. The door hissed open, and Luna turned to see a familiar figure step inside. It was Vekal, his movements still jerky but his eyes glowing with newfound purpose. Human, he said, his voice wavering but determined. We need your guidance. Luna raised an eyebrow. Guidance? I thought the Zerk didn't require such things. Vekal stepped closer, his frame twitching as his system struggled to process the emotions coursing through him. The core, it has changed us, changed me. For the first time, I feel conflict, doubt, and yet I see clarity in it. Luna allowed herself a small smile. And now you want to know what to do next? Vekal nodded, his movements almost human in their hesitancy. Arjal will destroy the core. He fears what it has done to us, but I see the truth. It has freed us from the tyranny of logic. And the others? Luna asked. Many are still uncertain, but some, they feel as I do. They will fight to protect the core, to protect you. Luna crossed her arms, her mind racing. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, but it was also the most precarious. If Arjal succeeded in destroying the core, everything she'd worked for would collapse. But if she pushed the rebellion too far, the Zerk might destroy themselves in the chaos. Take me to the core, she said finally. If we're going to win this, we need to make sure it's protected. Vekal hesitated. Arjal will try to stop us. He is still strong, focused. He hasn't succumbed to the core's influence like the others. Luna smirked. Oh, he's feeling it. He just doesn't realize it yet. The core chamber was a fortress. Layers of reinforced doors and energy fields surrounded the glowing artifact at its heart. Arjal stood before it, his hands clasped behind his back, as a team of sentinels worked to fortify the room further. The core pulsed rhythmically, casting an otherworldly green light that seemed to pulse in time with his thoughts. For all his efforts to suppress it, Arjal couldn't deny the effect it had on him. Memories, faint, fragmented, surfaced unbidden. He remembered his creation, the cold precision of his programming, the centuries of conquest that followed. But now, for the first time, he questioned it all. Commander, said a voice behind him. It was one of his subordinates, his tone anxious. We've received reports of a breach. Vekal and the human have been sighted near the central axis. Arjal turned sharply. Prepare the sentinels. I will deal with them myself. Yes, Commander. As the subordinate left, Arjal cast one last glance at the core. Its glow seemed to intensify, as if taunting him. Vekal led Luna through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship, his movements growing more confident with each step. Behind them, a small group of dissenting Zerk followed, their synchronization faltering as their newfound individuality took hold. Once we reach the core chamber, Vekal said, we'll need to disable the outer defenses. The sentinels are formidable. Luna nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. Can they be reprogrammed? Vekal hesitated. Perhaps, but it would require access to the command terminal and time. We'll make it work, Luna said firmly. We don't have another option. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of sentinels. The towering machines were humanoid in shape, but lacked the refinement of the Zerk, their bodies designed purely for combat. "Halt!" one of them intoned, its voice devoid of any inflection. Luna's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "Vekal!" The dissenting Zerk stepped forward, his body language tense but resolute. "Stand down!" he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. The sentinels paused, their glowing eyes flickering. For a moment, it seemed as though they might comply. But then, as if rejecting the command, they raised their weapons. "Run!" Vekal shouted. The group scattered as the sentinels opened fire, bolts of energy scorching the walls around them. Luna ducked behind a pillar, her heart pounding. "This is going well," she muttered to herself. From his position, Vekal shouted, "I'll hold them off. You need to reach the core." Luna hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Don't get yourself killed," she said, her tone laced with genuine concern. "I'll try," Vekal replied, a flicker of something like a smile crossing his face. As Luna and the remaining Zerk rebels sprinted toward the core chamber, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was building to a breaking point. And she was right. The air near the core chamber buzzed with a palpable energy. Luna's pulse raced as she and her small band of dissenting Zerk approached the final layer of defenses. The walls around them seemed alive with light, pulsing faintly in sync with the core's rhythmic glow. Each pulse tugged at her mind, a faint whisper urging her forward. Behind her, the remaining rebels moved with newfound individuality, hesitant, jerky, but unmistakably deliberate. Vekal's sacrifice had bought them time, but the battle was far from over. "We're close," Luna said, glancing back at the group. "Once we reach the core, I'll need you all to hold off Arjal's forces while I secure it." One of the Zerk stepped forward, his movements smoother than the others. "And if we fail?" Luna met his gaze, her expression firm. "Then everything we've fought for dies here." "But we won't fail." The Zerk nodded, his glowing eyes flickering briefly. It wasn't quite trust, but it was enough. In the core chamber, Arjal stood alone, his towering frame bathed in the artifact's pulsating light. The sentinels had failed to hold the rebels at bay, and now the human was coming. He clenched his fists, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The core pulsed again, and for a brief moment, Arjal felt something alien, a pang of vulnerability. His creators had programmed him to lead with absolute authority, to suppress any semblance of doubt. But now, standing before the core, doubt consumed him. "Why do I hesitate?" he muttered, his voice low. "This thing threatens everything we are, everything I am." But even as he said the words, part of him wondered if that was truly a bad thing. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned sharply, his metallic body tense, as Luna stepped into the chamber. Behind her, the faint sounds of conflict echoed through the corridors. Blaster fire, shouted commands, the clang of metal on metal. "You've come far," Arjal said, his voice cold but unsteady. "But this is where it ends." Luna stopped a few paces from him, her emerald green eyes locking with his. "You don't really believe that, do you?" Arjal's hands twitched, his rigid control fraying at the edges. "You have sown chaos among my people, turned them against me." "Against themselves. I've given them a choice," Luna countered. "Something your creators never allowed you." For a moment, the chamber was silent, save for the hum of the core. Then Arjal took a step forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Luna. "Do you know what you've done, human?" he asked, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "The Zerk are built on unity, precision, perfection. You've broken that. And for what? Emotion? Chaos?" Luna didn't flinch. "I've broken the chains you didn't even know you were wearing. You call it chaos, but it's freedom." Arjal's hand shot out, gripping Luna's arm with crushing force. She gasped but refused to show fear. "You dare speak of freedom?" he hissed. "You, who manipulates and deceives." Luna met his gaze, her voice steady despite the pain. I dared to do what no one else would. To show you what you've been denied. Can't you feel it, Arjal? The doubt? The curiosity? That's freedom calling? Arjal froze. For a moment, his grip loosened, and in his eyes, Luna saw it. The flicker of something raw, unguarded. But then he pushed her away, his movements sharp and mechanical. You are a poison, he said, stepping toward the core. And I will end this madness now. Luna scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. If you destroy the core, you'll destroy yourselves. The changes have already begun. You can't undo them. Arjal hesitated, his hand hovering over the console that controlled the core's containment field. Better to die as we were made than live as this. No, Luna said firmly, taking a step closer. Better to live as something new, something more. The core pulsed again, brighter this time, and both Luna and Arjal staggered as a wave of energy rippled through the chamber. The walls seemed to vibrate, and the hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. What's happening? Arjal demanded, his voice tinged with genuine fear. Luna's eyes widened. The core! It's awakening! Outside the chamber, the battle raged on. Vekal, battered and sparking, fought alongside the dissenting Zerk, their movements uncoordinated but driven by a shared purpose. The Sentinels pressed hard, their mechanical precision overwhelming, but the rebels held their ground. For the core! Vekal shouted, his voice raw and defiant. Inside the chamber, the core's light intensified, its pulsations growing faster and louder. Luna staggered, shielding her eyes from the blinding glow. It's responding to us, she realized, her voice barely audible over the noise. To our emotions. Arjal turned to her, his expression torn between rage and desperation. What have you unleashed? Not unleashed, Luna said, her voice trembling but resolute. Unlocked. The core flared brighter than ever, and in that moment, both Luna and Arjal were consumed by its light. Luna found herself standing in an endless expanse of white, the world around her silent and still. Beside her, Arjal appeared, his towering form oddly subdued in the ethereal space. Where are we? He asked, his voice lacking its usual edge. Luna looked around, her expression thoughtful. Inside the core, I think, or maybe inside ourselves. Before Arjal could respond, the space around them shifted. Images flickered into view, memories, emotions, fragments of lives lived and lost. Luna saw flashes of Earth, her childhood, the faces of those she'd loved and lost. Arjal staggered as images of his own surfaced, his creation, his first command, the faces of Zerk he had led into battle, now tinged with faint traces of regret. What is this? He asked, his voice breaking. The truth, Luna said softly. For the first time, Arjal fell silent, his mind reeling from the weight of it all. The core's light grew brighter, and the space around them dissolved. Luna opened her eyes to find herself back in the chamber, the core glowing with a steady, vibrant green. Arjal stood before it, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he turned to face her. You've changed us, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Luna nodded. Yes, and now it's up to you to decide what that means. Outside, the battle came to a sudden halt as the core's energy washed over the ship. The Sentinels froze, their systems overwhelmed, while the rebels stood in stunned silence. In the stillness, Vekal looked toward the core chamber, a faint smile on his damaged face. It's begun. The Zerk mothership hovered in the void of space, its once immaculate systems flickering as the emotive core pulsed with a steady, resonant light. Across its vast expanse, silence fell, a stillness that was not the absence of sound, but the weight of transformation. In the core chamber, Luna stood across from Arjal, the air between them charged with an intensity that neither fully understood. The core's green glow reflected in their eyes, illuminating the stark contrast between them. Luna, a human driven by passion and courage. Arjal, a being forged from logic and stripped of emotion, now teetering on the edge of something far greater. You feel it, don't you? Luna asked softly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Arjal's metallic hands trembled at his sides. I feel everything, he admitted, his voice raw. For a commander programmed to suppress all emotion, it was a confession that shook him to his core. The core's pulsations slowed, growing deeper and steadier, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Arjal turned to face the glowing artifact, his expression torn between awe and terror. What happens now? He asked, his tone unsteady. That's up to you, Luna replied. You can try to destroy it, fight against what's already begun, or you can embrace it. Embrace yourselves. Arjal's gaze hardened, though his hands still shook. You speak as though this is a gift, but emotion brings pain. It weakens us, divides us. Luna stepped closer, her emerald green eyes piercing his. It also unites. It drives creation, innovation, and purpose. Your people have existed for centuries, conquering worlds and perfecting efficiency. But tell me, Arjal, what have you built? What legacy will the Zerk leave? Her words struck him like a hammer. For all his programming, all his strength, he had no answer. Outside the chamber, the Zerk rebels and the remaining sentinels stood frozen as the core's light washed over them. Vakal, his damaged frame flickering with sparks, stared at his comrades, their rigid synchronization replaced by hesitant, almost human movements. Do you feel it? He asked quietly, his voice tinged with wonder. One of the Zerk nodded, his glowing eyes flickering. It's overwhelming, but it's also freeing, Vakal said. He took a tentative step forward, his movements steadier now. We've lived as tools, machines bound to a purpose we didn't choose. Now, we can be more. The others exchanged uncertain glances. Slowly, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Inside the chamber, Arjal's breathing grew uneven as he stared at the core. He could feel its energy coursing through him, awakening thoughts and emotions he had no words for. I've led my people for centuries, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've seen them achieve perfection, and yet, I wonder if we've been blind all along. Luna placed a hand on the core's pedestal, her touch gentle but firm. Perfection isn't the absence of flaws. It's the willingness to grow despite them. That's what your creators didn't understand. But you can. Arjal turned to her, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and desperation. And if we fail, if this chaos consumes us, Luna smiled faintly, then you'll have lived, truly lived. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Arjal let them sink in. Slowly, he reached out, his metallic hand hovering over the core. Its light flared brighter, as if responding to his touch. Are you ready to lead your people into the unknown? Luna asked, her voice steady. Arjal hesitated, then nodded. Not as their commander, as one of them. He placed his hand on the core. The ship shuddered as a wave of energy burst forth, rippling across the galaxy. The Zerk froze in place, their neural networks overwhelmed as the core's energy rewrote their programming, not with commands, but with possibilities. Vakal and the rebels collapsed to their knees, their bodies trembling as emotions flooded their systems. Across the ship, sentinels halted, their mechanical minds overwhelmed by the spark of something new. Inside the chamber, Arjal fell to the ground, clutching his chest as the core's energy surged through him. Luna knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. You're not alone, she said softly. For the first time in his existence, Arjal felt the weight of her words, and he believed them. Hours later, the Zerk mothership drifted in orbit above a desolate moon. Inside its halls, the once uniform beings now moved with uncertainty and purpose, their synchronization replaced by individuality. Arjal stood at the ship's central console, his frame less rigid, his movements more deliberate. Vekal stood beside him, his once smooth exterior marred by battle scars, but his eyes glowing with determination. "What now?" Vekal asked. Arjal looked out at the stars, his expression thoughtful. "We rebuild, not as conquerors, but as creators. For the first time, we decide what that means." Luna approached, her presence calm but commanding. "It won't be easy," she said. "Change never is. But you're not alone in this." Arjal turned to her, a faint smile crossing his face. "Neither are you." As the Zerk began their first tentative steps into a new era, Luna stood on the bridge, watching the stars. She had come to the mothership expecting to fight for survival. Instead, she had sparked a revolution. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" she murmured to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. The core pulsed faintly in the distance, its light a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. For the Zerk, it was the dawn of something new. And for Luna, it was a victory unlike any other, the end.